Biologically, the human brain is optimized to seek pleasure, yet across nearly every global mystical tradition, the senses are described as a fatal trap. In the 12th century, the poet-mystic Mahadevi stood in the royal court of King Kaushika, an environment designed for the peak of sensory indulgence. Kaushika viewed Mahadevi's physical presence through the lens of material consumption. He saw a body to be possessed, prompting a rebuttal that challenged the very basis of his authority. Mahadevi identifies the king's desire as Vishaya, the Sanskrit term for sensory objects. She highlights a linguistic warning buried in the word. Its root is visha, meaning a lethal poison. To her, worldly objects are not just distractions, they are toxic to consciousness. She presents the king with a list of historical failures. Ravana, conqueror of 3 worlds, and Devendra, king of gods, saw empires and dignity collapse when yielding to sensory lust. If the biological drive for pleasure could topple sovereign deities and world-conquering kings, it acts as a force of gravity that simple human willpower cannot hope to resist. Surviving it requires moving the mind to a different plane of existence entirely. Instead of fleeing the king's presence, Mahadevi executes a redirection of her internal attention. She enters a state called nirvishaya. In this yogic withdrawal, the sensor's objects remain in the room, but the mind's lines of attachment to them are severed. The nodes continue to pulse, but the central figure no longer receives the signal. By severing these connections, she neutralizes the poison. The king retains his physical palace and his guards, but he loses all psychological leverage over her. She describes her current state to the king's face, telling him that any attempt to embrace her now would be like embracing a dried tree, an onagita mata. In the ecology of the spirit, the dried tree is a symbol of maturity. It represents a physical body from which the worldly sap of lust and ego has been completely extracted, leaving behind a vessel that can no longer be stimulated by the material world. She has become a barren surface. Without the moisture of desire, the king's temptations have nowhere to take root. Mahadevi's dried tree metaphor maps a psychological milestone documented by mystics throughout history. This stillness mirrors the Zen concept of sunyata, or emptiness. These monks practice a physical grounding that coincides with complete withdrawal ego from the environment. This state appears in Sufism as fana. The dervish dissolves their boundary into kinetic energy, seeking to annihilate the ego for a cosmic reality. Christian mystics describe a similar aesthetic detachment, a survival of the dark night of the soul, where all sensory comfort is stripped away. Across centuries and cultures, this systematic stripping of the sensory ego remains the universal requirement for transcendence. This transformation granted Mahadevi a level of bodily autonomy that was nearly impossible for a woman in her society to claim. By identifying as a dried tree, she neutralized the male gaze. Her physical form became useless to the social and material hierarchies that sought to control her. The dried tree serves as an architecture of emptiness. By hollowing out her identity, she created a vessel to hold a presence larger than herself. That presence is Chennamalikarjuna, the Lord of the Mountains. As she emptied herself of worldly desire, she became a dwelling for this divine consciousness, much like this temple stands as an illuminated structure emerging from the darkness. At this stage, the ego is gone, and the world's influence is zero. Only a pure, vibrating awareness remains. Liberation is not found in consuming the material world, but in starving the ego until you are empty enough to hold the infinite.